So I want to talk about comparative studies, so there's kind of non-human primates in there, as well as children, looking at cultural transmission and in particular cumulative culture. That one. So someone asked earlier what the definition of culture is, that, at least the definition that I use, is based on partly on the definition of social learning. So it's learning that's influenced by the observation of or interaction with another animal or its products. And by its products, we just mean that sometimes, in the case of these blue tits here, they don't have to observe another animal piercing milk bottle tops and drinking the cream, which is a tradition that's spread across the whole of the UK back in like the 50s, 60s. Now we no longer have milk bottle tops on our doorstep, or milk bottles indeed, it's kind of died out. But they didn't need to observe others doing this, they just had to see the opened bottle tops. So social learning isn't just imitation, emulation, observation of actual behaviour, it can just be about products. And you've heard about teaching and observational learning, which we see here. So if you get the spread of information through a population due to social learning, then you might see homogeneity of behaviour within a population, which extends beyond the initial learning interaction between a dyad, for example. So there I would call that a behavioural tradition. Some people would also call that culture, it depends on your background. But I'm focusing quite a bit on cumulative culture today, and this is not just to do with the longevity of traditions, but the fact that they ratchet up in complexity, as Christian explained earlier. So the famous quote by Isaac Newton, that if I have seen further, it's by standing on the shoulders of giants. And it allows us to do all these great things. So cumulative culture requires high fidelity copying. Some people might say imitation, but that's kind of controversial these days. But it also requires us to be able to take on board innovations or modifications to existing behavioural traits. And this allows the accumulation of knowledge and iterative improvements over time. You've already seen this picture of the evolution of pounding tools all the way through to steel hammers. And obviously this is not correct, but it gives you an idea of what we're talking about. This guy here might be able to use an iPad, but there's no way in his own lifetime he could invent an iPad. And that's one of the hallmarks of cumulative culture. It's apparently a species-unique ability, and I just want to talk about a study that my first PhD student, Lewis Dean, did with myself and Kevin Leyland as his supervisors. And we designed artificial fruit problem-solving task, which you've already seen lots of. And there are 3 stages to this task, and each stage increases in difficulty, but at each stage the reward you gain is of higher quality. So it's kind of simulating cumulative culture, cumulative problem solving in one box. So here we compared capuchins, chimpanzees and children. And so here you can see at stage 1, a capuchin is like pulling a door open, sliding it, and they can get like a pretty boring reward, a piece of carrot, or if you're a child, a pretty dull sticker. And then, well, no sticker is dull for a child, but we tried to give them a dull one. So these kids were like aged 3 to 4, I think, 3 to 4. And here you can see chimpanzees doing the second stage. They have to push a button, you can see a zoom in here, push a button up or down to allow the door to move further open, and they might get some apple, which is slightly more exciting. And then here you can see children doing the final thing, which is twisting this dial to push the door even further open. And then the chimpanzees and capuchins got grapes, which are really exciting, and the children got like the big smiley glittery face sticker, which was very exciting for them, trust me. So we had lots of different conditions and things. I'm not going to go into that. But we wanted to look at what was underlying. Sorry.
I just had a quick question because I've seen this before. And what's the difference here between sequential and cumulative?
Yes. So yes. So this is it's a sequential problem-solving task in that you do one thing after another, but it's simulating cumulative culture in that you have to do the first thing before you can do the second thing before you can do the third thing, and they're getting more and more difficult.
And do they build on each other?
Yes. So you can't you can't get to this third stage and open the door all the way across without having opened the
So
first
that-
or the second stage.
Okay.
But I agree, there's some criticism that it's not like using one tool in ever more complicated ways.
But you don't have to redo the prior step. You're already past the prior step when you go into the third stage, right?
And we gave this task in an open diffusion context, which I forgot to say. So we have no trained models, we just give them the task in these small groups and see what happens. So we're looking to see if there are any species differences. And lo and behold, capuchins are in yellow here, chimps in red, the children in blue, and represented are the different stages, the proportion of individuals who got to the different stages, and the sort of the blocked colour is the proportion of individuals that got to that final ultimate stage. One chimpanzee did, and lots of kids did, and no capuchins. So we want to see, well, what might be underlying this, so we had loads of hypotheses to test. And what stood out was the fact that chimpanzees who are, children who are again in blue, they did more teaching. That's not surprising, we don't really expect to see much teaching in non-humans. Much more communication, so when there was verbal communication, children reached higher stages than when there was no verbal communication. We looked at recruitment to food calls in the non-humans with the communication aspect, and at baseline, the number of individuals approaching the task was no lower than individuals approaching the task after a food call. So it didn't seem to be that food calls were performing some kind of scaffolding effect, allowing individuals to learn this task. Matching, this is our version of imitation. So in children, we see much more matching than non-matching. So if an individual interacts with the task in a certain way, and then within 2 minutes another individual starts interacting, do they match what they've observed previously? And we don't see very much matching in the non-human species. Prosociality, here we're looking at spontaneous donation of rewards that individuals have retrieved from the box. With the kids, we would often see like a child who finished and got to stage 3, got the most amazing sticker, would spontaneously offer that to a child who hadn't yet got to that stage. And you can think of that as a kind of scaffolding, maintaining attention, maintaining motivation type enhancement of that individual's then ability to learn. And if anything, in the non-humans, say mothers would steal food from their infants or their juveniles rather than mothers providing food and rewards to their juveniles. So we seem to find like this socio-cognitive package of imitation, teaching and prosociality that may underlie this ability, at least in our task, for cumulative problem solving. But any of these hypotheses are only fully supported if not just between species they predict performance, but also whether they predict performance within species. So just to confirm, if we look at children, here we have the stage reached, not achieving anything, all the way down to stage 3, and the number of individuals who reached that stage and the number of groups they were in, and then the number of children that reached a particular stage without any form of social support, so without imitation or teaching or prosociality. And you can see that no children reach stage 3 without at least one of those facilitating capabilities or factors. And actually, I think it was 85% of the children that reached stage 3 required at least 2 of these facilitating factors. So this is kind of consistent with things that Mike Tomasello's been saying, that human social learners focus to a much greater degree than other non-human primates on the actual actions performed by others. So here he's talking about imitation. That uniquely human forms of cooperation, teaching and norms of conformity contribute to the cultural ratchet, so contribute to cumulative culture. So I don't really want to talk about all these other factors that could contribute to cumulative culture anymore, but to focus on, not actually on conformity, but on transmission biases, and conformity is a transmission bias, but I'm not actually going to look at conformity today, because that's a whole quagmire. So I want to look at the potential implications for transmission biases. So who do you copy? When do you copy? for establishing both behavioural traditions and also for enabling cumulative culture. So what are transmission biases? It used to be thought that it was always beneficial to socially learn, and you should socially learn whenever you had the opportunity. But actually there's costs and benefits to learning for yourself and socially learning, so we need to be selective and flexible in our learning strategies. I don't really know if I need to go into all of this, but there are costs and benefits, so personal information or asocial information. If you think about foraging, this is prior knowledge, or you're sampling knowledge of the environment. You might waste time and energy, you might expose yourself to predators or eating toxic foods in collecting personal information, but it's going to be trustworthy. You can rely on it because you've collected it. In contrast, social information, that's the observation of conspecifics. You can pick up outdated or unreliable information by observing conspecifics. And when you're doing that, you're losing sampling times. There's an opportunity cost. If you're observing someone else, you're not foraging. So that's a cost, but the benefit is that it really allows you to learn efficiently and very rapidly. So you need to balance those two sort of costs and benefits. So thinking more broadly, transmission biases avoid the costs that I highlighted here, but they also avoid the cost of vetting every single cultural variant that you see around you for its potential contribution to your fitness. So transmission biases are like rules of thumb or heuristics, which allow you to collect pretty good information now, rather than waiting for the evolution, whether it's innate or cultural, of perfect adaptation, because the environment probably will have changed by then. So this is why I think transmission biases are useful. So I'm going to, as Emma mentioned, there are loads of different transmission biases which have been proposed, and you can look up work by Luke Rendell and Kevin Leyland, where they have a whole classification tree of various different transmission biases and evidence for them in humans and non-humans. So I'm going to run through a few, and they're sometimes called social learning strategies as well. So one's to do with when you socially learn and who you socially learn from. And I'll keep returning to this slide because I'm just going to fire lots of information at you. Sorry. So first we're going to look at the potential strategy of copy others when you're uncertain and copy others when you're of low rank. So that's based on your state rather than anything else. So I'll keep returning to this study, which is a study that was published just last year on chimpanzees. Will Hoppit did some really fancy analysis, and Lydia Hopper, when she was postdocing with me, collected the data. I don't know if you can see that very well, but the chimpanzees are out in Texas, obviously Texan chimpanzees, and they live in these outdoor enclosures. And the enclosures have these little windows with bars across them, and the chimpanzees can reach through the bars to play with any task that you put there. If you put the task inside the enclosure, it's not going to last very long. So that's why we did it this way. So we can put this task, which is just a simple slide the door to the left or right, and that exposes the opening of a tube through which a grape can be retrieved. So we did this with 4 groups. We just exposed them to this task. This is an open diffusion in that we're allowing the social dynamics of the groups to influence who learns when, or who has the potential to learn from who chooses to asocially learn. So trying to get some ecological validity into social learning studies, so moving away from just dyadic, one individual learns from another. But it's really messy data. So then you need someone like Will Hoppit to come and do clever things for you, because I'm not that clever. Anyway, we also, in 2 of the groups, did train a demonstrator so we could seed pushing to the left or pushing to the right. And 2 of the groups, we didn't do that. But first, before we talk about transmission biases, we've got to confirm that there's social learning going on in these groups. And you can see from this graph, which just shows you the percentage of manipulations to the left or right in each group, there's a very strong bias within each group for either pushing left or right. So this is where we're talking about homogeneity of a trait within a group could be a really strong indicator of culture or tradition. but there's problems with this. We have no control, we don't have asocial learning controls, we have pseudo-replication because each individual is providing a various number of manipulations in here. So we use some kind of randomization method. So we have a chi-square value from our observed data of the bias across groups for pushing left or right. And through randomization, we created a null distribution representing chance and asocial learning. And we see that this observed value is in the very upper tail. So we have strong evidence, we think, that this is down to social learning. So moving on from that, we then wanted to look at, well, what kind of transmission biases might be going on. So the first one, which seems to be very prevalent across the animal kingdom and humans, is copy others when you're uncertain or when you lack personal or asocial information. So in this graph, you can see the number of previous manipulations an individual made using option X, so say pushing left. So personal information is increasing across here, and going up the y-axis is the proportion of individuals that switch away from their personal information from using X. And you can see that when individuals have very little personal information, they're more likely to switch away from that personal information, so they're more uncertain. And so this is evidence of copying, and they do so, they switch away from their personal information to the prevailing social information in the group. So just a very simple finding. Then we wanted to look at the role of the rank of individuals and whether that influences how much they choose to asocially or socially learn. And we used MCMC methods for this because it allowed us to include random effects. So our results are not biased by just one individual of high rank who happened to do lots of manipulations, for example. So we're just looking at individuals' very first interaction with the task, with their very first task manipulation. Did they push the door left or right? And what you can see here is the proportion of observations of option 1 and the probability of that individual choosing option 1 in their first task manipulation. And chimpanzees who were of medium or low rank, in the red line here, there was a strong association between these two things. But if you're of high rank, there wasn't. High rank individuals were not particularly influenced by the prior social information that they had collected. So we could very clearly see from our video data who had seen what. So we really knew how many times individuals had seen a dominant individual or a low-ranking individual push the box door to the left or right. So this does imply a state-based bias of copy others when you're of lower rank. And we see this in dogs and other species. It's not an uncommon finding. And it could just be that subordinates can't aggressively scrounge food from more dominant individuals, so they have to invest their time in actually learning by observing others how to access food. Okay, so another when social learning strategy is copy when personal information is costly. So not just are you uncertain, but is personal information difficult to collect or is it costly to use for some reason? There are lots of examples of this in the animal kingdom. I found loads of examples back in 2005 when I did a review of this. Since then, there have been some nice studies with ants that also seem to imply that if you have personal information, it's perfectly adequate and it's not costly to use. If you're non-human, you will stick with that information and you won't bother to collect social information. And there are all sorts of studies in sticklebacks and starlings. I did some in calotrichid monkeys and chimps and guppies that imply this. But we don't really know, until recently, what the story is with humans, trying to do exactly the same studies as has been done with non-humans, with humans. So this is early days of me and Emma teaming up to have a look at this question. And our PhD student Lara Wood carried out this study. She looked at 5-year-old children and posed them this puzzle box where basically, do you all know Kinder eggs? Yeah, so this is the inside of the Kinder egg and we can put a sticker in it. And then we can stick it in this task. And the problem is to get the Kinder egg out so you can get the sticker. And there are two ways of doing this. So you can sweep this handle forward, which pushes the Kinder Egg down a hole so it rests behind this door. Or you can pull a drawer outwards, which creates a hole and the Kinder Egg falls down. And then you can open the door by lifting or sliding, the same as the task that you saw Emma talk about. And Lara used a glove puppet. So the children obviously saw Lara, but they saw the glove puppet doing these manipulations. So trying to rule out a model-based bias. So trying to rule out any tendency to copy Lara because she's an adult. So trying to use a less sort of powerful model. And this was quite a big study. We like to design big studies of collecting huge amounts of data. And so there were 8 conditions. So basically, individuals can collect personal information, we give them the task, or they can observe someone interacting with the task, so they have social information, and then they get to interact with the task themselves. So what do they do? Then we provide them with further social information. And the key thing is whether it agrees with their prior information or whether it opposes their prior information.
Sorry, personal information, what was that?
Oh, sorry, that's asocial information. So you've interacted with the task yourself and you've learnt, say, to use the sweep part of the task.
So it's like a no model condition, you just presented with the task.
Yeah. And then, so you've learnt at the beginning to use, say, the sweep, whether you've learnt it for yourself or you've had a demonstration. And then you're given social information, either you see someone else using the sweep, or you see someone else using the drawer, or you receive no further information. And then you interact with the task again. So the key thing is, do children who already have adequate personal or social information from this stage use opposing social information? Do they bother to use that social information that they've already got perfectly adequate information? And I said to Emma, no, they wouldn't. All the studies I've done with non-humans, that they won't do that. And Emma said, oh yeah, they will. So I was wrong. They did use this social information. So these conditions in grey here are where individuals have prior personal or social information, then they receive either no further information or information that agrees with their prior information. Very few of them tend to go on to use the alternative method. So they're not, without social information, they're not just exploring and discovering sweep when they have prior information about a drawer, for example. In these conditions here, individuals have personal or social information, then opposing social information, and lots of them go on to use that alternative method that they've seen. And it's not just that they abandoned their prior method. Lots of them in this condition went on to use both methods, so they got lots of opportunities to interact with the task. So they didn't just, oh, I learnt sweep, then I saw someone use draw, so now I'm going to use draw. They alternated, that's the word, alternated between the two. So they're acquiring both into their repertoire, which, as I've explained, contrasts with what we knew about non-humans. And it may seem inefficient to do that, but actually this would be valuable in a very tool-abundant culture. You can generalise these different methods that you've learned and perhaps use them on another task. Someone was talking about that earlier. And obviously, if you're open to acquiring alternative methods, even if you have already a perfectly good method, that would enable ratcheting and cumulative culture, this openness to acquiring multiple methods that you could then use later on.
Well, all students are listening carefully here.
Why? Okay. So I now wanted to move on to social learning strategies to do with who you learn from, but I know I'm throwing lots of studies at you, so if you have questions about the previous ones, this might be a good opportunity. Wow, it's completely clear. No.
I mean, it's really nice. I wonder to what extent is there any sense of demand characteristics? So where you say you use this strategy, here's this strategy, where it's almost there's a sense in which it's almost saying to the person, you should try this out?
Yeah, so we there's always a sense of that with an experimental study like the child's, oh, why am I here? Oh, they're showing me something. Even if we don't say anything, we don't give any explicit cues, but there must be a sense of doing this for a reason.
Yeah.
So yeah,
But if there was demand characteristics, then what you would expect is when you've discovered something for yourself and then somebody shows you something else that's different, you then adopt that as, oh, that's how you're meant to do it, and then you consistently reproduce that in the rest of the trials.
but they
And
don't
they
do
didn't,
that.
they alternated between, so it's like they're practicing both. I have both of these in my repertoire, and I'm free enough within this experimental paradigm to be able to explore both of these. So it's not that they're kind of going, oh, I got it wrong first time, and now I'm going to do it right, because you've shown me how to do the right way.
I think demand characters will still be consistent with, try it out,
Okay.
don't you think? I mean, where it's kind of, here's...
I guess if we could do it in a more ecologically valid way, where it's because that study is dyadic, so if we kind of engineered it so it was a bit more open diffusion style, then I think that criticism would be a little weaker, because they weren't sort of being sat in this position where they think, well, I'm seeing something, so I should do something with it.
Yeah, I mean, the ones we did, we told them about the, high prestige, low prestige. But I felt that would have suffered from demand characteristics. But the interesting thing was that they didn't do it very much. Which seems to suggest, well, if there are demand characteristics, they might have been a bit stronger, but you still couldn't rule them out.
Yeah.
Whereas this, it would, if it's as a participant, I think, well, why are they telling me that?
Yeah.
What I would infer, you would want me to do something
But
with
then
that
why would you
information.
switch back to the next one? Why would you switch back to your own old method if it is demand characteristics that you think this person wants me to do this?
Well, I don't know what the demand characters are kind of vague what they want you to do. They don't say, try this one and discard your own one. They say, this is another one.
Yeah.
And, I'm not necessarily saying that's what it is. But
No, I
it's
think
just-
you're right. There's only one study, so I'm sort of speculating. Oh, look, kids are different, but we do need to do it in other ways.
One way then to explore this could be to adopt this idea from Zebra and Gergely with the ostensive context, right? So you could have either someone demonstrating it, making ostensive cues to you, or you could have something that is not really aware that.
You accidentally do something.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
this person
Right.
is not aware that the child is looking, right?
Yeah.
So it's a non-ostensive kind of context, and those two could be very different in the kind of propensity to which they are
Yeah.
experienced as.
Yeah,
kind
that's
of a-
really nice. Amanda
yeah.
Seed has done this kind of work with puzzle boxes with capuchins and children, but not pitting transmission biases. That's a really nice idea.
I suspect that the teddy bear was making ostensive cues in this particular.
Could have been, yeah. You have to have Pip the panda doing things accidentally. Yeah. Not sure how to do that, but yeah, no, it's a really good idea. Thank you. Write that one down, Anna.
Write it down.
Any other questions about those studies, or shall I move on? Okay. More studies to come. So thinking about thought about when you would use social information. Now I'm thinking about model-based biases which have come up. So who do you choose to copy? Choose might be the wrong word. I'm not implying it's a conscious decision, but who are you influenced by? So we can think about rank again, and so do you copy high-ranking individuals? Do you copy those with a reputation for being skillful in a similar domain? Lara Wood, our PhD student, has done a nice review of the developmental literature with regard to model-based biases, if you're into that kind of stuff. Okay, so I'm bringing you back to the chimpanzee study. So we looked for a whole variety of transmission biases. So again, we're just looking at whether chimpanzees push this door to the left or right. And we used MCMC methods again to look at the probability that individuals observed demonstrators or models who were using the task who were of higher rank than them, the same rank as them, or lower rank than them. So, and we could split the data because we knew exactly who's seen what when. We could split the data by whether individuals were naive when they were observing, so they'd never interacted with the task before, or whether they were informed, so they'd had at least one interaction. And you can see, if you look at the contrasts down at the bottom here, there's a much stronger indication of copying high-ranked individuals compared to same or compared to lower-ranked individuals when individuals were naive. So this would seem to imply that individuals are preferentially observing individuals who are of higher rank than them for learning purposes when they're naive. But actually we don't know, because, I don't know if you remember, but because each group was very homogeneous in either using left or using right, there's very few instances where an individual has seen a high-ranking individual move the door to the left and a low-ranking individual move the door to the right. So we can't actually say, has their observational records, the records of who they observed and what they saw, does that influence their behaviour? There's too much homogeneity in the data, so we can't say that for sure, but the fact that we have this difference in naive individuals and not in informed individuals seems to imply to us that there's an attendance bias for learning purposes. So we could call this a transmission bias, but we have to be a little bit cautious. So you can imagine that copying high-ranking individuals is generally a sensible thing to do, because if you've attained high rank, you've been a pretty successful individual. So as a rule of thumb, copying a high-ranking individual should give you useful behaviour. And this could have some implications. In this paper I tried to think about what this means for traditions and culture in the wild. Yeah?
Sorry, this, I'm not sure how yet, but this is somehow related to much of the rest, related to this influence of dominance in copying one another, maybe. So, do you think this is more reflecting, as you just put it, the inference maybe that a highly successful individual has a high rank because of being successful, or that somehow they're perpetuating their high rank by making others, or by ensuring that others follow their same methods? In the second case,
Yeah.
I would say that when individuals copy a high-rank individual, what they're doing is arbitrarily or artificially perpetuating the method by conceding high rank to the individual by copying their actions.
So you think the fact that this individual is being copied is enhancing its rank?
In humans, I would be sure that that's the case.
Yes, yeah. I'm not sure you would use that argument in chimps, because that's all, your argument there is almost getting towards prestige.
Yeah.
And I would never go
But
near
this
that.
This is also
Talking with chimps.
the thing with high-ranking individuals in non-human primates being looked at a lot more than others.
Yes,
And
so
somehow instantiates the hierarchy, but it also reflects the hierarchy. I mean, it's both
Yeah.
at the same time, so it's kind of hard to disentangle. I'm not.
yeah, so one of my key things, have you heard of directed social learning by Kusikabel and Fragazi? So they talked about the social dynamics in a group can influence what you learn and who you learn from. But that's just because, you pay attention to dominant individuals so you don't get beaten up. And what I wanted to distinguish was paying attention to dominant individuals for learning purposes, which is why I placed so much emphasis on whether individuals were naive. So I'm hoping that I've disentangled those two things, but in a lot of the literature it's not disentangled, and people aren't cautious about that. Is that what you were getting at?
Well,
Maybe.
not exactly, but it also helps a bit. It's
Okay.
hard. I don't want to hijack the presentation.
Okay.
I also have a question regarding that, just how it would play out, because so what do the very high-ranking individuals do? Do they not copy anyone, or do they then copy someone who's more of comparable rank or something? Because I would imagine, or also what Emma was saying, that some of the children, what they were doing is that there were some that were very popular, and they also watched more, and they were watched more. So it kind of makes sense, because since they were also watching more, then they also learned more. But if in this model it just goes up with rank, then the highest ranking wouldn't watch anyone or wouldn't copy from anyone. They would have the least resources of getting access to the right kind of information, you know.
Yeah, so the previous result I gave about the state-based bias, so you actually found that high-ranked individuals didn't pay much attention to social information,
Oh, okay.
which is what,
yeah,
so you-
okay,
you-
yeah.
it's the other
Yeah.
side of the coin, yeah,
Yes.
and that does
Hermione's, yeah.
does make sense. And one thing I
True.
forgot to say was these results are not influenced by, oh, there's a dominant individual there, I can't get to the task because I'm subordinate, so I'm just going to watch them. Because the way we modelled it, that doesn't artificially inflate observation of subordinate individuals. So it's not just a monopolisation of the task type effect. Okay. So I was thinking about the implications of chimpanzees having a copy high-ranking individual strategy for thinking about wild chimpanzee cultures. And remember that diagram that Emma put up of Andy Whiten's et al. Big study of wild chimpanzees. So I think that copying high-ranking individuals could restrict the accumulation of tradition. So by accumulation, the number of cultural traits that a population has. So in a big meta-analysis, Simon Reeder and Kevin Leyland back in the early 2000s found that subordinate individuals across non-human primates, but specifically in chimpanzees as well, tend to be the innovators. And that could be necessity is the mother of invention. If you're subordinate, you can't access resources, the normal resources, so you'll innovate. So if there's a tendency to copy high-ranking individuals, then few innovations are actually going to become traditions. And that's something that Nishida noticed in Mahali, I think, that there were lots of innovations going on, but very few of them became established as traditions. And obviously, if the subordinate individuals are innovators, but no one's paying attention to them, then you're not going to get much cumulative culture, because there could be all sorts of funky things going on, but everyone's just concentrating on the normal way of doing things, and they won't incorporate those innovations to ratchet up whatever technology there is. These are just speculations. Another thing I thought about was the maintenance of cultural diversity. So, are any of you aware of Lydia Lunk's work looking at wild chimpanzees? So, a very detailed study in the Thai forest on Ivory Coast. So, there are populations of chimpanzees that share migrants. So, female chimpanzees will migrate out of their group. And so she's looking at several populations that actually have mixing of individuals. They live in exactly the same ecology, yet one of the groups has a very different tradition for nutcracking than the other group. So in one group, you can use a wooden hammer to crack a nut. The nut's down here. You can't see this, or you can use a big stone to crack the nut. You have to use stones when the nuts are first available, because a wooden hammer won't work. But the stones are costly to find. There aren't very many in the forest. So most groups, when the nuts become softer, transfer to using a wooden hammer. But one group doesn't do this, and they continue to use stones. So this is thought to be, it's a behavioural tradition. Even though they share these migrants who know to move to using wooden hammers, they don't do that. And why is that? So several transmission biases have been suggested. Conformity, so that the immigrants conform to what's happening in the new group. Immigrants joining a new group are uncertain, so we talked about copy others when you're uncertain, when you might think that the environment has changed or you have inadequate information. And I also talked about in chimpanzees, we found that low-ranked individuals tended to socially learn more and be more susceptible to social information. And the females, when they move into the new group, they do start at a very low rank. But added to this, we might want to say from the results of copying high-ranking individuals, that as immigrants enter the group at low rank, even if they displayed a really cool novel technique that was useful, they wouldn't be observed, so they wouldn't be copied. So I'm not saying that this rank explanation is the explanation. Actually, what I want to move to is that there are several transmission biases that could be working simultaneously for different individuals in different ways. You look like you've had, no. Okay. Okay, so the problem with the chimpanzee data at the moment, as I said, is that we can't actually say whether the observational biases that we picked up on relate and transfer to behavioural biases in terms of actually what individuals did. So with Lara, our PhD student, we wanted to try a stronger study design where we would have different individuals, different types of models, displaying different types of information, so then we can track the behaviour of observers much better. And so we're looking at perhaps a more accurate transmission bias of, are you able to copy those who you know have a reputation for being proficient or good at specific tasks? And we wanted to do this in chimpanzees and children. So first we had to establish the reputation, not just for us to observe who was good at things, but also for the chimps and the children to observe who in their groups was good at things. So in the chimpanzees, we gave them these kind of tasks where here there's pieces of apple and oranges inside where they have to get them out. Here there are like Cheerios, cereal loops inside this container, and it has holes here, and you have to spin it and line the holes up to get the food out. And we had, I think, 6 or so of these different kind of enrichment tasks, and we could pretty much give the same tasks to children. So here we have truly comparative, for a change, tasks. Normally we have to tweak them, and they don't really look quite comparative. So what we're measuring here is not just how successful are the individuals at getting the food out, but how many different ways do they try? So how innovative are they? So various measures of are these individuals good at extractive foraging type tasks? So we can see that, but also the other individuals in the group can see that. So then within each group we can choose a high reputation model and a low reputation model, and we can match them so that within each group both the same sex, similar age, similar dominant status, and with the kids similar popularity level. So we've established our models, and then we have to train them. So the chimpanzees, the high reputation model, for example, might have been trained to scoop this little basket containing a piece of banana. So this contraption is put outside the cage bars, and they reach through, scoop the banana and retrieve it to themselves, or they use this hook and hook the basket. So we might have trained the high reputation to scoop and the low reputation model to hook. And with the children, we went back to the sweet drawer box, but we added a lever. So in the top here, you can actually flick the capsule down the hole with a lever. And we did that because with the children, we wanted to play with what influence does your prior information have on whether you copy individuals of high or low reputation. So some children, for example, already knew to use the lever, and then they saw individuals of different reputation using those other options, the sweep or the draw. And with the kids, we actually showed the 2 models on video screens, whereas with the chimpanzees, it was a more open diffusion type setup again. So the question is, do individuals, are they influenced by, more influenced by models who have a high reputation? And the answer is, well, it seems yes. Both species can track and appraise the past proficiency of conspecifics in their group, and they can use that to guide their behaviour. So with the chimps, sorry, this is a bit small. So the y-axis is the percentage of times that individuals matched the tool that was used by the high reputation model. And you can see here for touch, the first tool touched by observers, they were very much influenced by the high reputation model, and no different to chance for first attempts with the tool and first successes with the tool. So we're calling this biased stimulus enhancement. So stimulus enhancement because the type of object that the high reputation model used influenced the attraction of individuals to the same object. So if a model used the hook tool, then individuals were attracted to the hook tool. And it's biased because that wasn't independent of the identity of the model. So they were influenced by high reputation models to use the hook task. And we don't see any difference here with attempts or successes because we think the task actually was pretty easy. So they didn't really need to learn socially beyond that, beyond the attraction to the tool. With the children, if they were completely naive, so they hadn't learned how to use the lever or the sweep or the draw, they were not biased at all by whether an individual was high or low reputation. They used both methods equally. But if they had learnt to use one specific method and then they saw a high reputation model use their method, that almost endorsed their method, so they carried on using their original solution. If the low reputation model used their method, then they were actually much more likely to innovate the third solution. It's like, well, my method's bad. You know, this enabled them to assess their method. So you can see here some kind of use of reputation in learning in both chimps and children. So this would allow transmission of very useful information potentially. You're using reputation to establish who you should copy from. And obviously it would enable cumulative culture because you're allowing retention of useful information in the population. But this example here with the children, when they established that their current method was perhaps not very good, they were driven to innovate. And those two things you require for cumulative culture. Have I gone on too long?
No, you're good.
Okay. So I then have a study where we looked at age and knowledge. Sorry.
Sorry, this may, yeah, actually I think it's a bit important addition. I'm not sure what you mean by reputation. Maybe this has a slightly different meaning in English, but is it, reputation for me is when other people, I mean, what you're describing for me seems more like perceived proficiency, maybe.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So you're talking about this.
So
this is what you mean by reputation.
Yeah, so there's prior information about these individuals' proficiency with similar tasks.
But directly observable, right?
Yes, so
Okay.
we could see it, but also the chimps within the group or the children within the group could see that. Because they were exposed to all these, all of these tasks, lots of these types of tasks beforehand. So the chimpanzees and the children could see from themselves in their group or their
Okay.
class who was good at these things. So that was like their prior information, so established a reputation for those individuals. Does that make more sense?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, I have too many animations in here. Right, okay, so now let's look at whether you copy older individuals or more knowledgeable individuals. This is again going back to the chimpanzee study that I told you about. And if you remember, we actually trained 2 individuals in each group to either push to the left or push to the right. And although there are only 2 individuals, there seems to be an even stronger effect for copying demonstrators than there was for copying high-ranked individuals. But it's a fairly tentative result because we only had 2 individuals. And this kind of screws up my theory that low-ranked immigrants are not copied, because if they're displaying something useful here, then perhaps they would be copied, but maybe we can talk about that later. And then I just wanted to tell you about some work that I've done in the wild, so trying to make this work even more ecologically valid, looking at wild capuchins, to do with a more direct or content bias. It might not actually be correct to call it a model-based bias, but where you're making a judgment about the payoff of the actual behaviour you're observing and whether you copy it or not. So, have you heard about, these are bearded capuchins out in Brazil. Have you seen the famous pictures of the capuchins on their rear legs holding a massive stone, and they're just like cracking the nuts? So this is this species, but they're about 200 kilometres south, and they do even more cool stuff than those ones. So they use lots of different tools. They do probing, and they use stones to dig for tubers and things. So what we wanted to do, this is with Camila Coelho, who's just got her PhD doing this work, and Edu Otoni, both out in Brazil. We wanted to pose these kind of extractive foraging tasks to wild groups of capuchins. So here it's a box where you can lift this flap or pull this green knob outwards, and the food comes out in this tray here. And we can look to say, okay, this individual's lifting this flap, and this individual here, and here, and here. They're within 5 metres and their face is oriented towards the task, so we say that they've observed that manipulation by that individual. We also took social network data on the groups, so independent of the task presentation, who hangs out with who grooms who feeds with who's dominant to who, all that kind of social network information. And so the idea is, does the the sequence of events, the sequence of individuals learning to interact with this task, is it related to the social network in any way? So this is called network-based diffusion analysis. It's been used quite a bit recently. There's a big science paper using it with culture in Wales, for example. So what we found, if you look at a network of who observes who during the actual task interaction, then that's highly related to the who observes who is related to who appears to learn from who during interaction with the task, which would imply social learning. But what we found was actually who observes who within 5 meters of the task rather than at a greater distance was even more predictive of, so there are 2 different models that you compare, one with asocial and social learning and one with just asocial learning. So if the social network is predictive of the sequence with which individuals learn, then you say, okay, we have evidence for social learning. But actually, the social network which was most predictive was observing others within 5 meters, which implies observational learning rather than just, I see individuals at that task, so I'm attracted to the task and I'm going to learn for myself. So it seems to be good evidence for social learning. And we also found that outside of the task introduction, individuals who groomed each other a lot, so strong grooming relationships, that also predicted who was able to observe who. So we have other tasks that we introduced where we had multiple tasks at the same time, so there's less of a monopolization problem. And in that case, we find different networks predict who observes who, because it's all related to the social dynamics and who tolerates who. So you can get quite a lot of information from using these kind of techniques. So that's establishing, yes, we think we have evidence for social learning. But then we wanted to look at, well, what kind of transmission biases are going on here? And we seem to find evidence for individuals copying the most proficient individuals actually at that task. So we looked at the success ratio of individuals, so the number of unsuccessful manipulations compared to the number of successful manipulations of actually getting food. Yeah, so the success ratio of individuals predicted the frequency with which they were observed within that 5 meter radius, manipulating the task by naive individuals. And this did seem to interact a bit with sex, so there was a bias for observing successful males. So these networks, we had, sorry, I forgot to say, there are 2 wild groups that we looked at, one very much bigger than the other. And these are in degree social networks of who observed who, and they're normalized for the number of manipulations that individuals did. So this guy is a really big square, so he was observed a lot, but it's not just because he did a lot of manipulations. So large squares imply you're observed a lot, and the depth of the colour implies how successful you were. So dark, big squares are the successful individuals who are observed a lot. And these are the dominant males in the group, so it's not just driven by dominance. You can see that there are other large squares around. So if indeed this is a copy of the most proficient individuals, then that's the most accurate bias that there is, really. So this is going to be really good at retaining skills in the population and allowing traditions to establish. So I want to just briefly talk about something that I alluded to earlier about different transmission biases might actually be important during different phases of transmission. And Michael Huffman, who talked about playing with stones in Japanese macaque, all these different traditions, has established different phases that he talks about. So in the transmission phase, so something's initially discovered, you might think that actually a direct content bias, a bias for the skill and the proficiency displayed, is going to be most important. And then in the tradition phase, when a behaviour is established, there's less variation between individuals regarding skill, so you can use a more sort of rule of thumb, heuristic of just copy the dominants or copy older individuals because they are likely to be good at this skill. And this is just what Camilla Coelho found during her masters. So over a sort of 10-15 year period of Capuchin's nut cracking, you probably can't see this, these are in 1997 to 1999. Most individuals who were nut cracking were between 2 and 5 years old. 10 years later, those individuals have grown up and are adults, and actually what she found was that in 97, individuals observed according to the skill displayed by other individuals. So it didn't matter what age they were juveniles, but it was to do with proficiency. 10 years later, everyone just observed adults. It didn't matter whether they were proficient or not. That was the key transmission bias. I think I've probably chatted for enough time, so I might just leave this up here. And basically, this is just a summary of the findings, but just to highlight that probably the best transmission bias to investigate with regard to cumulative culture is copy if better. So copy another individual if the payoff of their behaviour is better than the payoff of your behaviour. And we have done some really lovely work by Jill Vale, another one of mine and Emma's students. We're just trying to, it's been years now, collect the final bit of data to publish that, but we do have some evidence that both chimpanzees and children can use that kind of bias. And I think I'll leave it there.